Have you ever stopped in the middle of a quiet moment and felt something touch your heart? A vague call, a distant look, or just a fleeting feeling that you were being led to something bigger than yourself? That night, in the misty hills, Ethan heard the first sound. It was small, faint, like a whisper in the darkness, but it made his heart clench. His footsteps slowly led him toward the sound, where the darkness was thicker and the air seemed to thicken. And there, under an ancient tree, he found a small creature, wet, shivering, but with eyes that seemed to hold a story. Ethan couldn't explain why he stopped. He only knew that those eyes were like a fragile ray of light in the endless night, pulling him out of his lonely silence. From that moment on, everything changed. But this is not a simple story about saving a small creature. It is a journey of discovery about compassion, connection, and the secrets hidden deep in nature, where the answers are always hidden in the weighty silence. And you? Where did you find this story? From a random glance or someone's recommendation? Share it with us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's special story. A story that will surely touch the deepest part of your heart. The cold wind cut like a knife into Ethan's face as he stepped out of the old truck, clutching his wool coat. The night in Misty Hills was quiet, broken only by the wind whistling through the trees and the thick fog that shrouded everything. It was late, but Ethan was in no hurry. He loved the quiet of the place, the feeling that the world was all his and the wild nature. But then, in the darkness, a tiny sound rang out, a faint, trembling moan, as if coming from deep within the darkness. Ethan stopped. His heart clenched, as if something was calling to him. "Is anyone out there?" He called softly, his voice swallowed by the fog. He listened for a moment, then walked toward the sound, his shoes damp from the sodden grass. The soft moans grew louder, like the cries of a lost soul. After a few minutes of groping through the dense undergrowth, Ethan suddenly stopped. Beneath the ancient juniper tree, he saw a small creature curled up, shivering in the cold. The creature was almost indistinguishable from the darkness. Its fur was matted with mud, smeared with rain, its small eyes flashing with fear, trembling and wary. Ethan knelt, trying to get low so as not to frighten it. He felt his heart soften. It looked so weak, like a small ray of light about to die in the endless night. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, his voice softer than ever, like a lullaby for both himself and the creature. He held out his hand, not rushing, just wanting to let it feel safe. The creature hesitated for a long moment. Then, as if driven by instinct, it took small steps towards Ethan's hand. The feel of its tiny paws against his fingers made something inside him light up, like a puzzle piece falling into place. He wrapped it in his jacket, feeling the faint warmth of its small body. The Misty Hills night seemed to stop, and Ethan stood there, holding the fragile, mysterious creature in his arms. He didn't know if he was holding a lost puppy or some miracle that had quietly entered his life. He only knew that from that moment on, everything would change, for him and the little creature. In the dim light of an old street lamp, Ethan turned away from the darkness and walked toward the light of the cozy house ahead. A new journey had begun, not just for the little creature in his arms, but for his own heart. Ethan's small wooden house sat quietly by the lake, where the moonlight usually illuminated the peaceful water. But tonight, the atmosphere was different, as if the whole house felt the new presence intruding. In the dim light of the oil lamp, Ethan gently placed the small creature on a soft towel next to the fireplace. He carefully dried the muddy fur, feeling the thin body shiver under his hands. "You must have suffered a lot," Ethan whispered. But the little creature did not respond, only looked at him with deep eyes, shining with wildness and an indescribable pain. Those eyes made Ethan feel like he was looking at a lost soul, not an ordinary puppy. That night, Ethan sat by the fireplace, quietly observing his unexpected guest. He left a bowl of warm milk and some bread beside it, but the little creature did not rush to it with the eagerness usually associated with puppies. It just moved forward, slowly and cautiously, as if weighing each step as it considered whether it could truly trust him. As the flickering fire lit the room, Ethan noticed details he hadn't noticed before. Long ears pricked up, as if to catch every sound, thick but unusually patterned fur, and a strangely wary gaze. Something inside him began to stir, a suspicion, a sense that this little creature was unlike any other he'd ever seen. As the days went on, Ethan noticed more and more strange things. No matter what toys or chew bones or other things a normal puppy would enjoy, Misty, as he'd given the creature a temporary name, had no interest. Instead, she would sit quietly by the large window, staring out at the misty forest with an eerie focus. At those times, Ethan felt like Misty wasn't just looking at the forest, but listening, communicating with a world he couldn't reach. The long nights in the cabin weren't as quiet as before. Ethan would often wake up to low sounds, like the howls of wolves, coming from the corner of the room where Misty lay. Those sounds, though gentle, contained a strangely deep sadness. They made Ethan both curious and uneasy, as if this small creature carried an unspeakable secret. Still, Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing attachment to her. There was something about Misty that touched a deep part of his soul, a part he had always tried to hide during his long days alone. A feeling that they were both lost souls, finding each other in this vast and cold world. Ethan decided to learn more about the little creature he had accidentally saved. He began writing on his blog about Misty, where he had previously shared stories about his adventures in the woods and his projects. But now, his writing took on a different tone, deep, emotional, and filled with unanswered questions. "Misty is unlike any dog I've ever met," Ethan wrote in one post. "Sometimes, I wonder if I've picked up a little creature in need of saving, or something bigger, a secret of nature that I can't quite understand." The cozy cabin now oozes mystery, where Ethan and Misty are writing the first chapters of a story that neither of them expected. And Ethan's mind keeps asking, who is Misty? That morning, the sun filtered through the mist, painting the misty hills a golden yellow. Ethan was ready to take Misty to the only veterinary clinic in the area. The road leading down to town was winding and lined with ancient oak trees, each branch whispering to the other. Misty sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes fixed silently out the window, as if she understood that this was no ordinary trip. The Wildwood Vet Clinic was located on the edge of town, surrounded by lush green fields. When Ethan and Misty entered, the warm atmosphere of the room immediately became tense. Curious glances from other pet owners turned to Misty. A woman walking a small dog whispered something to her friend. Ethan could feel the unease spreading, but he only tightened his grip on the leash and reassured Misty with a gentle stroke. "Good morning, Ethan. What have you brought us today?" Dr. Lila, the experienced veterinarian, called from the doorway. Ethan smiled, but couldn't hide his concern. "This is Misty," he replied, his voice light. "I picked her up in the woods. There's something not like a normal dog." Dr. Lila nodded, leading them into the examination room. The space was small but warm, with glass cabinets filled with gleaming medical instruments. Misty walked slowly, her ears perked up, as if she were examining every corner. Ethan felt his heart tighten. Misty wasn't afraid, but her wariness unsettled him, as if she knew the place better than he did. Dr. Lila began examining Misty with the care expected of someone who had spent a lifetime working with animals. Her hands moved gently through her soft fur, feeling every skinny joint. Misty lay strangely still, her deep eyes watching her every move. But then Dr. Lila opened Misty's mouth to check her teeth, and she paused. "Ethan, have you noticed her teeth?" she asked, her eyebrows furrowed. Ethan shook his head, the uneasiness in his heart growing. "Is there something wrong with them?" Dr. Lila didn't answer right away. She reached out to take off her glasses, her eyes unable to hide her surprise. "Her teeth aren't like a dog's. They're sharp, like those of a wild carnivore." Ethan stood still. He felt as if the entire room had shrunk, leaving only him and Misty. "What do you mean? Isn't it a dog?" Dr. Lila nodded slowly, her eyes filled with caution. "Number, from what I can see, this could be a hyena cub, specifically a spotted hyena, a species that usually only lives in the wilds of Africa." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Ethan took a step back, feeling as if the ground beneath his feet had just collapsed. Hyena? How did it get here in the middle of Misty Hills? Dr. Lila had no answer either. Maybe someone smuggled it in. Maybe it got lost in an illegal shipment. Whatever the reason, it doesn't belong here. Misty lay still, her eyes looking at Ethan as if waiting for an explanation. But how could he explain something he didn't understand? A feeling of helplessness and pain filled him. He had known Misty was special since the day he first met her, but he hadn't expected her to be this special. Dr. Lila touched his shoulder lightly, her voice filled with sympathy. "We need to notify the Wildlife Conservation Center. Misty can't live as a pet. She needs a suitable environment where her wild instincts are respected." Ethan nodded, but inside, he was a mess. He had cared for Misty as a friend, a part of his solitary life in the wild. But now, he realized that Misty did not belong to him, but to a larger world, the wild world. As he left the clinic, Misty looked back at him, her eyes sad, as if she knew that a separation was coming. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash, his heart heavy, but he knew that this decision was for the best of this special creature. In his mind, only Dr. Lila's words echoed. "She doesn't belong here, Ethan. But you gave her a chance to live that no one else could." And in that moment, Ethan understood that love was not just about holding on, but also about letting go when it was necessary. The dawn glowed pink across the misty hills as Ethan stood in front of the open door of the cabin, his eyes following the slowly approaching Wildlife Center vehicle. The air was quiet, save for the rustling of the wind through the old oak trees. Misty sat quietly at his feet, her ears pricked as if listening to something from afar. Ethan leaned down, his hand gently stroking Misty's soft fur. "It's time, kid," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Misty looked up at him, her eyes deep, no longer guarded like the day they first met, but instead filled with trust and a wordless sadness. When the staff from the conservation center walked out, carrying the carefully prepared cage. Ethan felt his heart shatter into pieces. Misty stepped into the cage without resistance, but before the door closed, she turned to look at him. Those eyes seemed to say something to him. A thank you, a goodbye, a promise that it would be okay. Ethan wasn't sure, but he nodded, as if in response. The car rolled away, carrying Misty away from the cabin and the Misty Hills sky. Ethan stood there for a long time, until the car disappeared behind the hills. The morning wind blew, cold but clean, as if to wash away any lingering sadness. "Thank you for coming," Ethan whispered, not sure if it was to Misty or himself. He knew that this encounter had not only changed Misty's life, but had awakened a part of him, a part he had forgotten in his lonely life. Misty was gone, but what she left behind was a strong sense of connection between people and nature, between compassion and action, between holding on and learning to let go. Ethan smiled, looking out at the sunlit horizon. New life begins, for both him and Misty, in ways he never imagined. Ethan and Misty's story is not only a journey of redemption, but also a profound reminder of the power of compassion and the connection between humans and nature. Through that journey, we learn that true love is sometimes not about holding on, but knowing how to let go when necessary. A courageous act that comes from respect and understanding. Misty not only gives Ethan a story to tell, but also a lesson to live by. That even in the smallest and most ordinary moments, we can find deep meaning and spiritual transformation. By reaching out to help, Ethan not only saves a life, but also finds the gentleness in himself. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If the story touches your heart, please like to spread the message of love. Share so that someone out there can also find enlightenment from this story. And leave a comment, an inspiring sentence about how you learned from nature or a simple moment in life, because sometimes the most magical things come from the smallest things.